Hey you guys, Dr. Jackie here. Today we're going to look at how to combine sentences by having an introductory dependent clause. Now, what you should remember is that all clauses have a subject and a verb. An independent clause is independent. It can stand alone and it's a sentence. A dependent clause, however, cannot stand alone. It doesn't have a complete thought. And so it needs an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. So every time you have a dependent clause, you need an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. And dependent clauses happen when we add subordinating conjunctions to the front of an independent clause. So subordinating conjunction is a conjunction, so it brings things together. But like a submarine, a subordinating conjunction makes one side less important. So a subordinating conjunction makes a dependent clause. It's less important than an independent clause because it can't stand by itself. It needs an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. And I don't care if you remember subordinating conjunctions, just remember some of them. Because, if, while, although, that's some of them. There's a lot of them. When. So, if we look at our sentences that we've been using through this whole course, you can see that we know these two are complete sentences. We already found the subject and the verb, and it's a complete thought in all four of these sentences. These are all sentences, right? And we know they are because they have subjects and verbs and a complete thought. They are all independent clauses because they can stand by themselves. Now, to make a dependent clause, we add a subordinating conjunction to the beginning of a sentence, okay? So learning to speak a second language, I'm going to choose to use the word while. While is a subordinating conjunction, and I'm just going to make it blue so you remember that this is the subordinating conjunction. All right? So while, and then remember, learning is not a proper noun. It's not I. So we make it a small L. Okay? And now when we read this, it used to be a sentence. It used to be an independent clause. But just by adding the subordinating conjunction to the beginning, it becomes dependent. So it's no longer a complete thought. So while learning to speak a second language is helpful for businesses, well, what? You need something to finish the thought. So all dependent clauses require an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. Well, luckily, there is an independent clause right here. Okay? So the way we combine a dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, or an introductory dependent clause, is you can see up here we add a comma in between. So the dependent clause is capitalized because it'll be the first letter of the sentence. So while is capitalized. All first words of every American sentence or every English sentence is a capital letter. Then we add a comma after it, and then we add the independent clause. And in general, the independent clause does not have a capital letter. It's a small letter unless it's a proper name or I. And then at the end, we finish with a period. Okay? So if we follow the formula here, we take out the period, we add a comma. So here's our dependent clause, and it has a comma after it. And then they is not a proper noun. It's not I. So we just make it a small t. This is our independent clause. So now it's a complete sentence. While learning to speak a second language is helpful for businesses, they like to hire bilingual workers for their offices. Terrific, right? So when it's an introductory dependent clause, there's a comma after the dependent clause before the independent clause. Okay? Okay. In the second one, we know that both of these is These are both independent clauses. They're both complete sentences. They can stand by themselves. But when we add a subordinating conjunction to the beginning, so if is a subordinating conjunction, and this is not a proper noun, it's not I, so it gets a small t. Now, when we look at this, this is a dependent clause. In other words, it can't stand by itself. If the moon moves in front of the sun tonight, well, what? Right? You want more. It's not finished yet. Can't stand by itself. So this subordinating conjunction makes this a dependent clause. It needs an independent clause to complete it as a sentence. And here it is right here. This is an independent clause, right? So we know when the dependent clause comes at the beginning, when it's introductory to the sentence, the comma comes after it. It is not a proper noun or I, so we make it a small I. And now this is a beautiful sentence, a beautiful combined sentence. If the moon moves in front of the sun tonight, it's called an eclipse of the sun. All right? Okay, you guys. That's dependent clauses at the beginning of the sentence. We call them introductories. Take care.